Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, January 29th, and WNBA free agency is off to a dramatic start. Coming up, we'll get into the two blockbuster trades as well as some free agency news. This is Locked On Women's Basketball presented by Gametime.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. My name is Kelsey Leite, and I am joined here by another one of the next writers, Bella Munson. And we are going to get into a bunch of free agency, trade, all that news that has come out this week. It has just been a wild week. And I think just like proves how much the WNBA is changing in terms of what these free agencies and off seasons look like, how much players have more of a say in where they go and what they're doing. But yeah, we're going to get into all of that. But thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember that the Locked On Women's Basketball podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So it's definitely been a spicy week. We are recording this on Wednesday, January 29th. And so far, two big trades have been reported. We have a big free agency signing. So we'll kind of just like quick hits on a lot of it and just see how much we can get in the time that we have. But let's kick off things today by talking about the news that came out later yesterday evening, which was that Brittney Griner is going to be signing with the Atlanta Dream as a free agent. She has played for the Phoenix Mercury for 11 seasons. She was drafted first overall there in 2013. And this is probably one of the biggest moves that WNBA free agency has ever seen. You know, Griner has been part of the Phoenix Mercury for a really long time, has a really great relationship with them, but just, I guess, decided to, try out the waters of free agency and really liked what Atlanta had to offer her. So, it's a new era for her, and I think it just represents the new era that we're in terms of the WNBA. So, Belle, my question for you is, first of all, were you shocked at the news that Brittney Griner decided to sign with Atlanta?
I think everyone was shocked. I mean, the reports had said she was exploring free agency, but she had spent her entire career in Phoenix.
Yes.
And they just put all of that money into a brand new practice facility for the players. It didn't seem like a situation that she would necessarily want to leave. So I was definitely shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I think people were shocked in the first place last week when she said she would start taking meetings. Like, usually her free agency has just been like, yep, signing with Phoenix, that's it. Doesn't take any meetings, just goes back with, and like, I feel like that's very, not to say old era WNBA, but like so many of those classic WNBA stars, the Sue Birds, Diana Taurasi's, et cetera, stayed with their WNBA team for their entire career. And I honestly think like Candace Parker might have been one of the first like big stars to be like, I'm going to move. And so, yeah, I think that's just like, again, like the era that we're in, the fact that movement is a lot easier. And the fact that these franchises now are in an era where they can offer different things. And so different places are going to give you a different experience. But what do you think adding Brittney Griner adds to Atlanta?
I mean, I think adding Brittney Griner to any team is a win. Yeah. I mean, her size, even if she's not directly blocking shots, is going to affect so much activity in the paint, so much about how the opponent has to attack. She's been, adding a bit of that 3-point shot to her game in the recent years. She's, there's not a lot of teams that have the size to compete with her. Mm-hmm. So even if you send a really physical defender at her, mm-hmm. you can't always stop her. So I think, I think signing Brittney Griner was going to be a win for whoever it was. And, Atlanta don't necessarily have a ton of size, especially because Cheyenne Parker-Tyus sort of played inconsistently and doesn't sound like she's going to return. Naz Hillman got a lot of minutes, but she's pretty, like, she's 6'1", playing, playing that forward position. So I think it just is a massive pickup for them.
Yeah, and I think something that Atlanta has been lacking over the past few seasons is definitely that veteran presence, that like tried and true champion presence, which we all know Brittney Griner is. She's a WNBA champion, an Olympic champion, a world champion, European champion. So I think just like adding that level of like veteran experience and like, kind of calm presence on the floor for a team that's filled with a lot of young stars. I mean, they have Ryan Howard, they have Alicia Gray, they have Jordan Canada, and so many more on the roster that are just like really promising young players, but not necessarily have had the experience that someone like Griner has had. So I think it just adds like an extra layer of like nuance to that team, and especially with their new coach. Like I think I don't know too much about Smesco's kind of like background and history because he's kind of a new WNBA coach. But from what I've seen online and like the people who are familiar with his coaching a little bit more, it seems like she's going to be a great fit. So, yeah, I think this leads to like the question of, does Atlanta finally, push into the playoff race, or are they still kind of going to be lingering in the end? What do you think?
I think it's so hard to say because, you know, obviously Seattle's my beat. So I saw last year them sign
Yeah.
Scarlett Diggins-Nick and Nneka Agumake and then get swept in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like signing those brilliant, no matter how brilliant the player is, it doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
guarantee getting into the playoffs, but they've
Yeah.
been really close for a couple of years. So I think if there was a signing that was going to push them over the edge, this absolutely could be it. They
Yeah.
have those really great guards who can shoot really well from three, and they really were
Mhm.
mostly missing an inside presence. Not that they couldn't still use some depth and everything,
Yeah.
but I think it makes a huge difference for them. And obviously, Phoenix had tons of years of success with Griner leading that,
Yeah.
inside of the line. So I think it definitely could lead them into the playoffs. We'll see, but
Yeah.
I think it definitely gets them a lot closer.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that I was thinking about yesterday, like coming into this season where we have one expansion team starting, and then next year we have Toronto and Portland coming. I'm curious how like the playoffs change. Like, I'm assuming we're just going to expand the number of lottery teams. Like, there's still just going to be eight teams in the playoffs, so that makes it a little bit more competitive because less teams overall, I guess, when you think of the percentage, are going to make it. So that adds like a little fun thing. I'm curious to see how they end up, like if they end up tweaking anything in terms of the playoffs, but that's a completely different conversation. Um, Free agency technically hasn't started yet. I mean, they're announcing these moves and the intentions of the players, but contracts are starting to be signed as of Saturday, February 1st. So what do you think? Like there's other free agents, Satu Sabali, as much as she's not an actual free agent, she's on the move. Courtney Vandersloot, Dejanay Carrington. There's so many names that are going to be, on these big contracts coming up. Do you have a prediction of like another big move that we might see?
I mean, in terms of actual movement, I was interested to see that Tiffany Hayes was taking meetings
Mm,
with um, teams other than the Las Vegas Aces, considering she had previously said if she was going to play another year, it was going to be in Vegas.
yeah.
I think, as much as she's towards the tail end of her career, she's been really effective
Yeah.
anywhere she's been. She is
Yeah.
a tried and true scorer, truly a dog. So I think I have no clue where she'll end up if she does end up somewhere outside of Vegas, but I think that's definitely one to keep an eye on.
For
I think,
sure.
I'm curious where Diamond DeShields ends up.
Yeah.
He, has had some injury issues and didn't necessarily have her best year last season,
Yeah.
but obviously she was on that championship winning team with Chicago, and I think still has a lot of potential, in terms of what she can bring to a team. So that's another one where I'm curious if she's, looking elsewhere and wants to, be on a team that's maybe a little bit closer to competing.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so coming up next, we are going to break down the Loyd and Plum trade. So stay tuned. This is Locked on Women's Basketball. So attending NFL playoff games is definitely an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I mean, I'm in Canada, so I haven't had the chance to go to too many NFL playoff games, but I know people who go down to Buffalo, and it just seems like a super fun, super exciting experience that I hope to experience one day myself. So Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Obviously, the Super Bowl is the biggest ticket left in the NFL season, so you can use Gametime Picks to find tickets for the Super Bowl. Browsing through the deals is super simple, and you can find great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The Super Deal is especially impressive, offering the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gives peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. So we are back on Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm here with Bella Munson. We are talking WNBA free agency and trades, and we are going to get back to the trades, which is kind of the biggest news of the week. I feel like every time I look at my phone, there's another like blow up, another news break, another wild thing. But the first one that broke, the thing that kind of catapulted us into trade season this week was the requested trade from Jewell Loyd. She got what she requested. She is out of Seattle and she will be heading to Las Vegas in a 3-team trade that sends Loyd to the Las Vegas Aces. And then the Aces are sending Kelsey Plum to the LA Sparks. And then the LA Sparks are sending the number 2 overall pick in this year's WNBA draft to Seattle. And if there's a few other assets going around as well in that 3-team trade, but those are the big hits. Jewell Loyd to the Aces, Plum to the Sparks, and the number 2 overall pick to Seattle. So we're going to dive into this. I know Seattle's your beat, so you have a little bit of knowledge around, this trade and what it means for the roster. But my first question is, who do you think got the best deal out of this trade?
When I first saw it, I was a little bit skeptical about Seattle's return. And the more I, talked it through with people and thought about it, I really do think Seattle got the best return out of the trade. I think, it doesn't benefit anyone to force a player who doesn't want to be there to stay. Yeah. She only had 1 more year left on her contract, and it was a massive contract.
Yeah.
So not only does it clear up a ton of cap space for them and force it onto a completely other team that kind of needed that cap space. So I'm not entirely sure how they're going to figure that out over in Vegas.
Yeah.
But it gives them, pieces for the future. This team has all of their championship success has come from or been built around star players that they've drafted themselves, right? So Lauren Jackson and Sue Bird in the early 2000s, and then Breanna Stewart and Jewell Loyd in the 2018-2020. So I think getting such a high pick in what should be a pretty solid draft and, giving up a player who wasn't going to want to be there anyway, I think they got a really, really great deal out of it.
Yeah. And I mean, Las Vegas obviously gets, the cap space gone from Kelsey Plum. I think Jewell Loyd was getting paid a little bit more than her. So that kind of, again, they'll have to shift stuff like that. I love the idea of Seattle getting this number 2 pick. I'm curious, if they end up keeping it or if they try and call Dallas up and say like, hey, like, what do you want for this? Because I know, I'm sure Seattle would love to have the number 1 pick, especially in a year where Paige Beckers is, the so far consensus number 1 overall pick. But For me, the intriguing part of this trade is the fact that LA gives up the number 2 pick in exchange for Kelsey Plum, who's a great player and was a number 1 pick in her own right. But this team to me seemed to be leaning a little bit more towards like the youth movement. And so adding someone like Plum, as opposed to some drafting, say, Olivia Miles, who right now is kind of the consensus that might be that number 1 pick, or Kiki Iriafen. There's a few different names that could be picked at too. But do you, like, in your opinion, is the trade for like getting Plum instead of one of those young players, like, is that better?
I think it's hard to say because they got Rickea Jackson and Cameron Brink last year.
Yeah.
I think those are two, although they weren't technically number 1 overall picks, those are really talented players who can make a big impact on that franchise for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about really young players learning from more veteran players.
Mm-hmm.
As much as, you want to think they can kind of all grow together, sometimes you need someone there to tell you, hey, this is the lesson from this, or just help them along, get them there a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
I think Plum also has really big star power. I was here for her jersey retirement at the University of Washington.
Yeah.
And she is so beloved here just because of sort of the presence that she brings. And, fans love her attitude and her, willingness to interact with fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, something that a market like LA could really use just in terms of having a draw of that kind of player. And I think Cameron Brink and Rickea Jackson can be in that, kind of space as well, but they're just not quite there yet. Obviously, Cameron Brink was injured, and so we just didn't get to see as much of her.
Yeah.
But I think, it's a bit surprising that they would give up the number 2 overall pick. But if you have the chance to get something, someone wants to be there, they might stay longer, a California native.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to say no to someone with the kind of proven success that Kelsey has, especially if you're, if you want to win a WNBA championship, what better than a 2-time WNBA champion?
It's true, yeah. And I mean, speaking of that, like, as someone who is familiar with Jewell Loyd's game, like, what do you think she's bringing to this Las Vegas Aces team, just individually as a player trying to bring them back to their championship status?
I think she definitely brings some better defense than they've had in previous years. I know that has been, something their head coach, Becky Hammon, has talked about a couple different times after games, needing the defense to be better. It'll be really interesting to see whether or not she rebounds from this past year where she shot basically career lows, or the lowest since her rookie season. And, that was with Nneka Ogwumike and Skylar Diggins-Smith around her, is that it'll be interesting to see if that was an indication of, a decline in form, as she's getting older, or if it was really because she wasn't happy with the situation here in Seattle. And so mentally it affected her game more than anything. She obviously has experience playing with Chelsea and Asia and Jackie with USA Basketball. So, I think it'll be, as transitions go, relatively seamless. But it'll, her numbers haven't been as good as Kelsey's in previous years. And so, as much as she's very beloved by Seattle, and, she's a brilliant player, she just hasn't been quite as good the past couple of years. And I know, from her own comments, she's not at all happy with that.
Yeah.
So she's certainly going to try and bounce back and make a difference. And I think it's just sort of a waiting game to see if that happens. I mean, based on how she's performing it Unrivaled, she's looking pretty good. She's looking like she's ready to make that comeback. So she definitely could make a big impact for them.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes like a change of scenery is what you need. And obviously, you know, it seems like the last year for her in Seattle, especially, wasn't exactly what she had wanted it to be. So, you know, sometimes things, you know, don't work out. You have to get a change of scenery, get a fresh start. So, yeah, I'm excited to see this new look Storm team. I'm excited to see this new look Vegas team, like, you know, slightly new look in terms of exchanging Plum for Loyd. But it's, yeah, definitely proving to be a season that's going to be a lot different in terms of what fans are used to and what in terms of where these players are. So we're going to take a break. Next up, we're going to chat about another big trade that came out this week that is exactly what we're saying right now. You know, a lot of big change happening. Alyssa Thomas is headed to the Phoenix Mercury. So we'll be right back. All right, so we are back. This is Locked On Women's Basketball, and the WNBA world was shocked again yesterday. We were shocked many times yesterday. Just shock after shock after shock with the news that Alyssa Thomas was being traded to the Phoenix Mercury. The Olympic gold medalist has played her entire career in Connecticut, and now she's headed to Phoenix, which I can only assume was by her own request. There's really no other way to put it unless the Connecticut Sun were really just like, let's blow it all up. But I doubt it, because why would you give away Alyssa Thomas? Because that automatically makes you like a high contending team. So later we found out that the exact trade would be Alyssa Thomas and Ty Harris going to Phoenix, and Phoenix would be giving back Natasha Cloud, Rebecca Allen, and the number 12 pick in this year's draft. Again, wild. And I also want to note that while this is not exactly in the trade, you can kind of assume that DeWanna Bonner is also going to Phoenix. They're kind of a package deal. Bonner is an unrestricted free agent, so she can just go and sign in Phoenix. And for those who don't know, they're engaged. So they probably want to go together and not be separated. But what were your initial thoughts on this trade?
I was both very shocked and not at all shocked.
Yes,
I
yeah.
think
That's a good way to put it.
I think it's shocking to see any player who's been with the franchise so long move, but
Yeah.
also talked quite a bit about the lack of quality facilities in Connecticut,
Yep.
particularly the like sharing the community rec gym with the children's birthday party.
Yeah, that was the big news last summer. Yeah, that day they got kicked out of practice early because the community center they practice in was rented out for a child's or a toddler's birthday party. So they had to end practice, which is not ideal.
Right. And then you go to Phoenix and they've built their new multi-million-dollar facility. So I
Yep.
think that's got to be I have to imagine that was a major, major draw for her. She talked
Yep.
about those, you know, the situation in Connecticut not being acceptable for professional athletes. And, you know, she's at a point in her career where she really is such a known quantity that I think she
Mhm.
really, I don't know if this was the first time she really had that sort of known
Pull.
quantity status to be able to
Mhm.
force a trade like this, but it definitely is some of the most known quantity status she's had after so many like really standout seasons and winning an Olympic gold medal.
Yep.
That I'm, you know, you can't really blame her for wanting
Yeah.
to be somewhere where the conditions are better, where you have
Yeah.
you're treated like a professional athlete.
Exactly. And I mean, DeWanna Bonner used to play in Phoenix, so they have a little bit of familiarity there. And the part of this trade that ends up making it bittersweet is like when Phoenix opened those facilities last year, it was Natasha Cloud who was out there on the internet showing what they were giving them, showing how well they were being treated. And now Cloud is the piece that essentially moves in order for Alyssa Thomas to come in. So these trades are always push and pull. Like it's great to see Alyssa going somewhere where again they're treating them like the professionals they are, but then you have Natasha Cloud being moved out of Phoenix after she chose to be there, and then you have Rebecca Allen who requested a trade out of Connecticut last year and is now traded back to Connecticut again. So I'm so curious if like this is the end of these two, like of their free agency slash off season journey, or if they're going to be moved again. I don't know if like they heard the news and were like, because I think it's like widely known in the WNBA community, especially because of that community center thing, that Connecticut not only doesn't have the facilities, but as of right now, as far as I know, don't have the plans to make a facility. Like, it's one thing, some of these teams are like, okay, we're breaking ground. Like Chicago has announced that they have their facility being built, and, you know, Seattle built theirs, and Phoenix and all of that jazz. But like Connecticut hasn't even said like, hey, we're going to build something. There's kind of like, hey, come play in Connecticut. Like, so I'm very curious how that is going to go for Cloud and Allen, especially two, you know, tenured players in the WNBA. I mean, Allen has suffered with injury. She was out, I believe it was with an ACL or an Achilles, one of those long-term injuries last year. Cloud is, you know, playing in Unrivaled right now. Pretty, you know, she could request a trade and move somewhere else. A lot of people have been saying they could see her in New York. They could see her, you know, other places. And then they get the number 12 pick, which is, I guess, technically the number 11 pick, because the draft is weird this year because Vegas got their pick taken away. But anyway, they get the number 12 pick. But that's essentially like the biggest thing for them, because now obviously they're in a huge rebuild, and you have to be thinking about the draft. You have to be thinking about getting picks. So in my head, I'm like, do you turn around and, you know, trade Cloud and Allen for more picks, like try and get into that early free or early draft pool now? Because at this point, like, who's going to come in free agency other than people that you draft? Like, what do you think?
I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see them turn around and either trade them for younger players who are, you know, maybe on closer to like beginning of their rookie scale contracts, or for draft picks. At the same time, I don't really know what team is so in need of them that they would give up any early first round draft picks. I think you could definitely get maybe some late first round draft picks or some, you know, second round draft picks, but they aren't, you know, they're great players, but they're not, you know, they're not the Jewell Loyds, the Kelsey Plums, where you get, you know, those really top picks for them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think like one thing that I wanted to ask you before we head out is like, I'm not sure how much you've been watching Unrivaled, but just the idea that all of these players are in one place during this very critical time of free agency. Like, how do you think Unrivaled is affecting the moves that we're seeing in free agency?
It's really interesting because, you know, obviously in previous years, sort of, we could kind of tell when a team was going after a specific player because they would suddenly pop up at a European game.
Yes,
there were just a couple of them.
Like, so, New York's in Turkey. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and so like, you know, I know Nneka Ogwumike and Pokey Chapman, the Seattle Storm assistant coach, were seen sitting, you know, at Unrivaled together. So I have to imagine that not only are, you know, head coaches and GMs out there trying to recruit, but players recruit each other. Like, if you happen to be on the same, you know, team, or, you know, you just kind of practice around each other, you're just living in the same city, like it just gives you more of an opportunity to be like, hey, like, my experience here has been really great and you don't have a team yet, so why don't you consider this? Like, you've been playing really well. So I'm curious to see how many of, you know, if we see particular like Unrivaled teammates end up teaming up in the WNBA. But it's definitely, you know, I think there was a little bit of that with Athletes Unlimited, but you didn't have quite as many WNBA players involved, whereas Unrivaled, it is all WNBA players.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting factor that is adding in to free agency right now. So, Bella, thank you so much for joining me today on Locked On Women's Basketball. Is there anywhere that the people can find you for your work?
You know, that's a good question. I'm on Blue Sky now, and I've mostly ditched Twitter, but my Blue Sky is some combination of my first and last name, but I couldn't tell you what it is right now, unfortunately.
Amazing. So for Locked On Women's Basketball, I'm Chelsea Leite, and don't forget you can sign up for the Locked On NBA newsletter for free at lockedondaily.com. Thank you for tuning in.